we've finally gotten to the last game exclusive to the previous generation of consoles, and in my experience, a campaign that people initially really liked for the new things it tried to do, but after a while the general consensus seemed to falter. So where do I think Black Ops 2 stands all these years later? Well, to start, it's definitely quite a bit longer than the previous games. While the game could be completed quicker if you skipped one of the new features known as Strike Force missions, interfacing with this content led to the game taking around 5.5 hours. Speaking of, Strike Force missions are one of the major additions to Black Ops 2. Set in the relatively near future, technology has allowed for much more effective Overwatch efforts on battlefields. In-game, this manifests itself as side missions that allow you to switch between controlling various units or giving them orders so that you can complete objectives on small but open maps. While you can just tell units what to do, you can also take direct control of them, or a variety of other weapons on the battlefield. These side missions effectively work like mini RTS matches, where you're defending or attacking objectives within time limits. They were much more difficult than the main missions, and I personally could never get enough of a handle on the controls to do it all from the Overwatch viewpoint. I was much more effective at picking a unit and doing things myself. The more interesting thing about Strike Force missions is that they play into the campaign itself to some degree. Failing them can have effects on the outcome of the story, and there are even main mission objectives you can fail, which you then have the chance to make up for by doing an extra Strike Force mission. I think Strike Force missions are an interesting inclusion, though I feel like they should have ratcheted down the difficulty of them. After all, you pick a difficulty to play on that difficulty, not to have some parts suddenly jump up to something much harder. Especially because, as far as I understand it, failure in these missions is persistent, meaning you have to start the campaign over to fix it. The variety in Black Ops 2 doesn't stop there either. This game is filled to the brim with shiny things to keep players paying attention. And no, I did not word that incorrectly. While it does mean you always have something new to do, it also means that the game can feel shallow, as you never quite get more than just a taste of anything you might find interesting. This includes all of the fancy new future tech, some of which can genuinely change the way you play in great ways. You spend so much time in flashback missions that much of the cool new tech feels wasted. What is nice though, is that the game actually leaves some things up to the player that were more guided in the previous games. Don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of stuff where you're basically staring at a follow icon, but there are some nice bits where you're left to your own devices, which is particularly refreshing when it deals with stealth. Combine this with the fact that you can sometimes make binary choices about which path to take in a mission, and that some small choices or mistakes have minor consequences that persist throughout the rest of the campaign, and it's not difficult to see what they were going for here. Ultimately, I'm still of two minds on a lot of these choices and gimmicks. On the one hand, they do provide some interesting options to the player. On the other hand, none of them really begin to reach their potential. That doesn't mean there aren't choices that can be really impactful on the experience. For example, this is the first Call of Duty where you can completely create your loadout before each mission. Your choices can have a pretty decent impact on the way you play out firefights, obviously, though I found it was generally best to stick to something somewhat similar to the default guns, with attachments being what makes the loadout truly yours. You also have optional special equipment you can find throughout each level, which is a nice touch. The best choices they made though deal with the underlying mechanics. This game was transformative in that sense, even if people didn't notice it back then. It's the first game thus far that I can truly say feels modern when dealing with the quality of life choices. Firstly, they seem to have greatly reduced the amount of infinite spawn shooting galleries, allowing players a bit more freedom to tackle things at their own pace. I also never really had a problem with enemies not being cleaned up behind me as I moved forward, thankfully. During the sections where there are seemingly infinite forces, the focus is instead often on completing objectives rather than just carving an opening. This enables them to still keep up the pressure, but means that the focus of these sections can be on more than just killing things. This is where the best variety in Black Ops 2 lies. The futuristic segments in particular feel great mechanically. There's very little emphasis on explosives or last stand enemies. Flinch is lower than ever too, and it can be further mitigated using the perks in the loadout system. Similar to Black Ops 1, this game is much more character focused. It also carries on from Black Ops 1's story directly in many ways. The villain, Menendez, isn't anything particularly special, but he is kind of reminiscent of a Far Cry villain in some ways. It's a nice change of pace from the angry Russian stereotype and gruff soldier type dudes. The game is also the best looking title on the previous generation of consoles, easily. The presentation of Treyarch's projects finally feel super polished and focused here, though performance is still unstable. Even though I don't quite think the actual design of the campaign is as strong as Modern Warfare 2 or Black Ops 1, I think Black Ops 2 makes up for that with just how far improved the core mechanics are. I cannot stress enough just how much of a step up they are. The series feels truly smooth for the first time. In short, the underlying systems finally feel like they have a modern level of polish, which, to me, meant an absolute ton in terms of making the game playable. So I'd still say Black Ops 2 is a success.